This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening. Welcome to the Late Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio with your host, Ray. Tonight, we will be discussing positive masculinity, how to engage boys in the classroom and in their education. I will be joined by my guest, Dave, who is a teacher and pastoral lead in a secondary school in the Midlands, and hopefully we'll hear from more of you as well.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
All right, so good evening. We are experiencing minor technical difficulties, and I'm hoping that our guest Dave is able to join us right now. The topic tonight is boys, teaching boys, trying to teach boys, successfully teaching boys, attempting and failing to teach boys, all of these and more. I've got some personal experiences with this. I'm obviously at a mixed secondary school in Derby. My guest, Dave, is also at a mixed secondary school in the Midlands, and he's also a head of year, but I'll let him introduce himself in a few minutes. It's been a bit of a shock to my system, having worked in an all-girls school for 11 years with only a brief period of time at a mixed school, but it was a very different type of school to the one I'm in now. It was the type of school where if you don't sit down and be quiet and toe the line, then you end up not being at that school anymore at all. So it was a very kind of strict, rigid school. And now I find myself in a much more inclusive, much more warm, caring environment, or at least one that, really, really tries hard to be. And the approach to student engagement and student behavior and students, the way they are in and outside of the classroom is very, very different. So I've never in my life been faced with a room half full of male students and really had to work to keep them engaged. So I'm finding myself in a bit of a difficult position professionally, and thought that I cannot be the only one. I cannot be the only one who's dealing with this. And it turns out I absolutely am not. So when I was researching this topic, I came across some very interesting statistics. So according to UCAS from 2018, so this is 5 years old now, and it's obviously pre-COVID. Who knows how that's impacted things. But as of 2018, over 29,000 more girls applied to university than boys at age 18. And in secondary schools, the average progress rate score for girls is well in the positive. I think it's 0.22, and the average for boys is in the negatives, 0.25. And again, that might be a few years old now, but there is a difference. There's a difference in attainment. There's a difference in attitudes. There's a difference in all sorts. And I want to be really, really careful when talking about this, because it's to me, it's dangerous territory, because so much of this conversation depends on sweeping generalizations and definitions of boys and girls that are lacking any kind of nuance or inclusivity. And I want to be really clear about that. When I'm talking about girls and I'm talking about boys, talking about the sex on their birth certificate, the sex that they provide when they enroll in a particular school. And obviously, if we're talking about including boys in education and improving their engagement, then we are going to be making some sweeping generalizations, because no two students are the same. No two people are the same. Every individual is obviously unique. So this is kind of a generalized discussion in and of itself. So there may be some things that are said or that are phrased slightly crudely. And I think we should all just bear in mind and be very, very aware that not every student necessarily fits into either one of those categories, and that everyone obviously is an individual. So I think as long as we're clear on that from the get-go, we should be able to have our generalized conversation of generalizations and kind of get on with things. So as I said, my personal experience is one of, I often feel like I'm waiting through murky water. And instead of being surrounded by alligators or crocodiles or anacondas or whatever strange creatures you find in there, there are boys. There are boys there, and I just want to get to the other side. I just want all of the students in my classroom to learn the thing I want them to learn, but I can't get through the water because of the boys lurking. And I'm becoming very concerned with my own viewpoint and my own attitude toward this. And I feel like I need to speak to someone, speak to people who maybe have or are currently experiencing similar challenges, and maybe we can hash out some of the issues and clarify some things, and ideally come to some solutions, maybe some suggestions about what might actually be working. So is Dave, can you hear me okay? Are you there?
Hi, Ray. Yeah, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. Good to hear your voice. Do you want to introduce yourself and just to tell everyone a little bit about you and your background and why this is a relevant topic to your life?
Yeah, certainly. So I've only been, I say only, I've been a teacher for 12 years, which by the week almost feels like it's not enough experience sometimes to have. I've been in three different
Mm-hmm.
secondary schools now, all mixed. Obviously, a couple of
Okay.
placement schools for all the training and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Been in and around the north of two schools there of varying different affluences and backgrounds of students, I'd guess, is probably the best way
Yeah.
to say that. And obviously, more recently found my way down towards the Midlands, which has honestly been so like a really big learning curve for different reasons in terms of sort of like the affluency of the areas that obviously working in and students' backgrounds is vastly different as well. Uh, and then obviously with those within that 12 years, five of them have been in a pastoral I guess middle leader role,
Mm-hmm.
which again has come with its own challenges and backgrounds. The types of situations they deal with has changed, moving from the north of England down to, as we say now, towards the Midlands. Is um, yeah, different challenges have come about. Ones that maybe I expected, ones maybe I wasn't necessarily prepared for. And now obviously teaching in a school in this area has been as you say, it's been difficult to try and overcome some of the challenges that presented within the classroom. If we take away the pastoral role for a moment, the the manner in which to go about classroom behaviour is certainly different. The approach to it
Mm-hmm.
and the responses you get from students in those classrooms has definitely changed. And yeah, boys have been typically, as you say in the lead up there with the statistics and stuff, are traditionally more difficult to potentially, I say get results out of,
Yeah.
but I don't necessarily mean that in the sort of broader sense that we're teachers. That's what we aim for eventually, but in terms of before that in key stage 3, working our way down towards obviously the lower years, the secondary school, it's instilling those general beliefs in how we want them to manage the classroom, and even there presents its difficulties. Then
Yeah.
moving into GCSE, you then obviously have different challenges in terms of they've picked the topics they want to pick, but then necessarily aren't always the best options for what they want going forward. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's been an interesting sort of like I've just circled back around learning curve, and obviously one that's definitely going to be around for a while.
Yeah, and I've found that as well because I've been working in London as well for the past 13 years. So I'm also relatively new to the geographical area, which obviously every area is different and brings its own set of challenges. And I think I had underestimated the differences, the vast array of differences. And people said things to me when I moved up here full time last summer, oh, it's so different and it's not London, and it's just a whole different world as soon as you get outside the M25. And I just was like, come on, it's kids are kids. It's not that bad. And they'd start talking about, socioeconomic deprivation, cultural deprivation, which I was talking a lot about in the show 2 weeks ago. And I just thought, yeah, well, London's got really deprived areas too. It'll be fine. I'll be fine. And had not really grasped the depths of the swamp into which I was sinking. And I say that with love because I am enjoying it, but it is very different, as you said. So what I'm trying to think, yes, let's start with teachers. What do you think are the main differences between teaching boys where we are in the Midlands area now to other places you've been, other places you've taught?
I think it's like the general approach to how they feel about school.
Mm-hmm.
So working in Middlesbrough for 5 years, obviously deprivation wise, there's huge contrasts of wealth in between
Mm-hmm.
sort of like the different regions of Middlesbrough, and that does obviously come into our schools as well. I
Yeah.
think the kids know that. Obviously, they live and grow up in the area. They come from all those different backgrounds. They see the area around them. They've got obviously Newcastle very close. Well, I say close, it's an hour on the an hour's drive, which I guess relatively
Yeah.
speaking is pretty close. You've then got York, which is obviously then a very sort of vastly different affluent area with you've got obviously quite a lot of wealth coming from there, and then you've got Middlesbrough in the middle, which is generally, as you see, is forgotten, so to
Yeah.
speak, in a sense of this northern powerhouse they want to create. But sometimes they forget that there is huge differences within that, and the way in which people go about school is they see how the easiest way to get out of those places is by sitting down in the classroom and uh, learning and getting the best they can, because they don't necessarily want to stay in those particular places forever. They know the best way out is to get an education and go to university across any parts of the country of their choosing, with any particular grades, as can anyone else.
Yeah.
You get the necessary grades. You can go wherever you choose. That's the options available to everyone. And then obviously coming to down towards the Midlands, I think we need to instill that belief in them, as that has done up north as well, that there is a genuine approach to things, that in school, if you're able to get the grades you want, that you still have the opportunities as everyone else to go to universities, go to college, and sometimes it's maybe a bit more difficult to instill in boys who, as you said at the start, traditionally don't view education as uh, as important lower down the years, and then suddenly the
Mm-hmm.
penny drops in GCSE, and then they realise that, oh, actually I need to concentrate and knuckle down, and I can get the best grades I want, but sometimes that penny drops a bit too late.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and
which
some
we've
people
seen
would say
recently.
that's sorry to interrupt. Some people would say that's,
No, not at all.
oh, well, it's the rate at which they're maturing. Girls supposedly mature faster than boys, so they supposedly realize these life truths a little bit before the boys do. And as you said, by the time the penny drops for a lot of our male students, it's too little, too late. But I'm not convinced that's the whole story. I feel like there might be more going
No, not
on.
at all. Um, I think social media has a huge part to play in how young children, students view education as well, and
Hmm.
how a lot of people, like students, look towards YouTubers who don't necessarily finish school but then have made millions from gaming online,
Hmm.
from streaming, from, well, see popular YouTubers making millions and billions. I think one of the richest is earning tens of thousands of dollars in a minute. I think I saw in one of the sort of like
Oh, that
videos he's done
depresses me.
recently.
That
So
depresses me
it
on so many
is,
levels.
and then there's sort of like, oh, that's I don't necessarily have to go to school because I'm gonna become a YouTuber and stream to multiple thousands of
It's
viewers and earn
interesting that
that
that's what you
way. And
pick out.
it's
So have you had a lot of students talk to you or mention that that's their their aspiration in life, YouTubing?
yeah, like even from obviously working in the Midlands now, but there was something that was said up north, like too, like a lot of people like YouTube. Oh yeah, I'm gonna get the grades I need because my parents want me to, but actually I'm just gonna become a YouTuber and stream FIFA. I think was always a popular game, or was always one of the popular FIFA on a yearly. You could always
Always
tell when the
is.
release date was coming up because they would be talking to you about, "Oh, so you're going to buy it?" And I'm like, "No, like, I have no interest in. Like, I enjoy gaming, but I have no interest in spending my life sat in front of a TV screen playing that particular game." And you can just tell that that's what they wanted to do. They talk to it like the obsession is unreal when it comes
See,
to.
this is I feel like this is similar and different to what I found. So, and again, I mentioned this in the last show, but I polled some of my classes in recent weeks about careers and aspirations and so on for the last topic. But I obviously saw who wrote down what, and some of them put their names on it, even though I said they didn't have to. And in my one of my year 8 classes, of the boys in the class, 1/3 of them had no idea what they wanted to do at all when they got older, which to me is shocking that you would have that many that had absolutely, like, usually they have delusions of grandeur at that age. Oh, I'm gonna go be a doctor. I'm gonna go be an engineer at Rolls Royce. I'm gonna go do this thing, and have no concept of what they need to achieve to do it. Another third had a wide range of career options, including medicine, including law, including engineering, and a whole bunch of other things. And the final third of them had no career aspirations beyond wanting to be a footballer. And this was the
See
boys.
that? See, that's mad. So, like, obviously, you'd always expect so, like football to be in there, at sort of, especially a year 8 class. It's one of the most popular
Yeah.
courses. Like, ask anyone that's there. But I think the idea is that a third of them having no career like idea what they want to do. Maybe that's something we need to be looking at in terms of how to engage them younger in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what they want to do. Like everyone says, a
Yeah.
footballer, they want to work in some sort of high end, amazing job, but we don't actually necessarily provide them the tools and information to
Yeah.
know what they need to do that. Like, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
I'm certain at one point, if you were to ask me lower down when I was at school why I wanted to be a footballer, was definitely an answer at some point along the line.
Yeah, well,
And it's
according to my 13, 14-year-old self, I should be on Saturday Night Live right now, and yet here we are. So
yeah,
it's,
I
we go
should have
through
been in
phases.
front of Wembley multiple times. Um,
There's always time. There's always time, Dave. So that was a bit of a shock to the system, and I did that poll a few weeks ago and talked about it on the last show. But it was the boys' responses in particular that surprised me. The girls in the class. I mean, there was about an equal number, to be fair, that had no idea what they wanted to do with their lives. But the ones that had some sort of concept of where they might want to go tended to be a lot more realistic. Realistic sounds a bit patronizing, but you know what I mean. They seem to have a better grasp of what was out there and what they needed to achieve in order to, or they needed to, the steps they needed to take in order to achieve their various ideas. And the boys, it was really, really surprising. So I've started to kind of put the pieces together that I probably should have put together in September, and realize that there must be a connection between this lack of awareness, ambition, aspiration, personal goals for the boys that I'm teaching, and their behavior, attitude, effort in lessons, on assessments, and so on. Like, those two things have to be connected. There's no way that they're not. So, have you found a similar thing to what I found, that the boys you teach are harder to engage in class material? What subject do you teach, by the way?
I'm a geography teacher, but I have taught.
Geography.
Yeah, geography is my primary one. Is what I
Okay.
initially trained at. But I've taught well, I say multitude. I've taught science. I've taught Spanish. I've taught a bit of history. I've taught PSHE, even a bit of RE. So I've taught across the varied humanities plus
Okay.
a little extra.
Okay.
Um, Now, certain subjects are easier to guide the conversation around what type of things they want to be when they grow up. But I'd
Mm-hmm.
still argue that the vast majority of conversations I have with boys are generally geared around either not knowing around what they want to do. So PSHE, for example, is a great way to find and have those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and don't get me wrong, not all of them want to engage. Some of them have no idea what they want to do, even higher up the school, and they find it terrifying that when I have these lessons with them and I'm like, right, guys, we're now going to spend half of this lesson researching how to go about getting what qualifications you need for a particular role that you want to be looking at when you leave school. And some of them are terrified by that. They have no idea.
Yeah.
They then obviously waste part of the lesson trying to find what's going on. They're not sure what they want to do. But then there are some which have absolutely nailed on in their head what they want to do, how to go about it, and what they need to do to get there. And you find that higher at the school, especially so like towards year 11, they obviously, most schools around this point have had their mocks. They get their grades back. They then find out actually how things are going and what they need to improve. And this is now probably the melting point where a lot of them are like, right, now I need to focus. I need to pay attention, and it's a make or break for them. Whereas for some of them, it's too much and they don't necessarily engage. You can generally sometimes find that engagement levels go down, which is unfortunate, but it happens across the country.
It's like they start to shut down a little bit. Yeah
absolutely. And that's just PSHE, whereas obviously teaching geography, my main subject, the conversations, obviously we look at different parts around the world. Obviously, being in geography, you don't necessarily just focus on the United Kingdom, but they see things happening around the world and the topics we look at and the conversations which open around. So how do people go about looking at these particular places? How can I go about getting there? What's happening in this particular country? And how can you work in this particular place if you're like, having worked and lived overseas myself, it then opens up the conversation. Well, right, this is the job I'm doing now, but actually before I used to do this, and this is how I got there. And don't get me wrong, it was a matter of circumstance, but the idea is that I can have those conversations about how to get to those particular places, do those particular roles, and garner a genuine interest. Has been interesting, to say the least, and sometimes more difficult to engage with some classes more than others, but that's down to a multitude of different reasons.
Yeah, so some of the I've been reading a lot of literature about this recently, and one of the things that keeps coming up in the whole, there's so much out there that we'll talk about it later on, but one of the things that keeps coming up is, make it relevant to their lives, their particular interests, to the students in your classroom. Obviously, we try to do that anyway. And then some other suggestions are, open it out globally, try and expand their horizons. And it's like, great, let's try and fit the whole world and their front room in our classroom and try to make connections to everything and see what sticks. It can be a bit overwhelming. So what I would love to hear is from any listeners. You can send a text or call in who have similar experiences or a wide range of experiences in this or different ones, and potentially some suggestions, because I found some suggestions. I don't agree with them all. I think some of them are rubbish. So if we could hear from more listeners about their points of view before we get to aforementioned literature, that would be wonderful.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
On the 24th to the 26th of January 2024, Bet UK is back, and even better for educators. New for 2024, Table Talks empowers educators to collaborate openly and connect deeply with like-minded individuals in the education space, as well as tech user labs, the brilliant new tutorials and working groups at Bet, where technology users will learn how to get more out of their institution's tech from the top education technology experts in the world. Whatever your goal, you'll find it at Bet 2024. Educators go free. Get your tickets today at www.uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The big political news this week was the launch of the DfE in England's consultation on how best to implement minimum levels of service in schools if teaching and support staff unions go on strike. The BBC reports that education unions who were involved in talks with government over MSLs called the announcement shameful. One of the two options being put forward is to guarantee that vulnerable children, those due to take exams, children of critical workers and all primary school pupils can go into school on strike days. A leaked DfE document suggests that this amounts to 74% of pupils. In October, Education Secretary Gillian Keegan said MSLs would be introduced with the unions on a voluntary basis at first. But the government could use legal powers brought in earlier this year under the Strikes Act. The DfE says the plans will protect education. The consultation will last 9 weeks. All 4 teaching unions involved in talks reacted angrily to the announcement. Much of the media focus in recent days has been on the inquest into the death of Ruth Perry. The Guardian featured a report focusing on comments made by colleagues of the late head teacher, which focused on her evident distress during the days of the inspection. Much has been made of comments from Ofsted inspectors that Mrs. Perry was upset, tearful, and looked like she was in pain. The inquest began after Mrs. Perry's family discovered that its bid for legal aid had been rejected, but a crowdfunding campaign saw donations totalling more than £63,000. Behaviour in schools has also been a hot topic on both sides of the England-Scotland border. The Dunfermline Press reported that Fife Council's education chiefs are trying to curb a rise in violence in schools, but they don't believe in negative consequences. Instead, children learning about bullying should be an empowering experience. In a new version of the anti-bullying policy, the aim is stated that children do not bully others because they understand the harm it causes and choose not to cause such harm. It goes on to say where children do choose to bully, we need to engage with them educationally, supportively and restoratively rather than punitively. Comments on the paper's website, however, appear to show disapproval of the policy, with one comment describing it as utter nonsense and another saying it was psychobabble. The draft policy has been issued to head teachers, guidance staff and educational psychologists for their views, before schools are asked to create a personalised policy for their setting based on the final draft. Meanwhile, over the border in England, The Guardian reports that head teachers are describing a culture of non-compliance among pupils and parents. Whereas once a parent who was called into school to discuss concerns was likely to be broadly supportive of teachers' decisions, now heads are saying parents more often side with their child and take to social media to register their feelings. Many heads also say that behaviour has changed from having to deal with lesson disruption to managing internal truancy, as pupils come to school to socialise but refuse to attend lessons to learn. Some leaders also highlighted an increase in verbal abuse and swearing. Head teachers also pointed out that whilst challenging behaviour is nothing new, non-compliance is on the increase, and the reduction in the availability of specialist support services has made matters worse. One leader summed up the current situation. Since COVID, people seem to be far less tolerant, and that includes pupils and parents. Popular quiz show University Challenge is in the news as the BBC reports that a Christmas episode has been pulled after 2 contestants complained about a lack of provision for their disabilities. According to the report, contestants were not provided with promised audio description for visual images or subtitles to help with audio processing. The BBC agreed to withdraw the episode after the complaints were received. Finally, the BBC features a report on a civil servant who quit her Whitehall job to retrain as a teacher. The former employee of the DfE began teacher training in 2022, and Ms Melbourne is just one example of over 35s joining the profession, according to charity New Teach. Research suggests that recent graduates are shunning the profession, but older people are stepping up to fill the gap. Figures also suggest that older starters stay in the profession longer than the national average and are more representative of society in terms of gender and ethnicity. Could this be a solution to a recruitment crisis? This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Well, that was interesting. That a bit in particular about bullying is in Scotland is quite shocking. There's been a lot on Twitter recently about that. I mean, I as a child, just to be completely off topic for a moment, as a child, I feel like I had been on every single side of the bullying scenario, every possible side of involvement, including the bully. And let me tell you, I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew exactly the harm it was inflicting. And I'm not sure giving me a hug and teaching me a lesson necessarily would have been the best solution to that. But anyway, so yes, definitely very interesting. Maybe that alongside something else, perhaps. So we've had some texts coming in. So Paul is a primary teacher, and he suggested. So he says, I found you can hook boys in more with references to their favorite things. For example, space, sports, gaming. Girls tend to be easier to encourage through stories or relationships or friendships, and that I can absolutely see some truth in that, and I can see how it would be particularly relevant to various things that go on in primary schools. Absolutely, the younger they are, especially. Have you ever taught any primary, Dave?
No, I spent I think it was a week in a primary school as part of my secondary school training, and that
I had to do the same.
School trained teacher.
Yep. I honestly can't imagine anything worse. Props to the primary teachers. You guys have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh man.
Some of the way they work outside. My patience is pretty good, but I do.
No, primary teachers should be running the country, that's for sure. Paul also says the boys tend to want action, competition, or anything involving mess or disgusting stuff. Again, I can imagine, and that's why I teach secondary. Yeah,
that's probably still relevant in some secondary schools as well.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you, Paul, for that. And again, open to any callers or any other texts from anyone who wants to contribute. So in the meantime, this actually follows on quite nicely from what Paul was saying. So when I was looking up what are the differences and how do we teach boys and how do we engage boys, I found a lot of interesting things that I'm going to come back to because we have Steve. Oh, Steve, where'd you go? Steve popped up, said he wanted to contribute and then disappeared. Try again, Steve. Oh, here we are. Let's see if... Hello, Steve, are you there?
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I think everyone can hear you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about you and your experience and what you think?
Yeah, just to start with, I think everything you've been talking about so far this evening is really fascinating. I'm a senior leader in a Midlands secondary school, so maybe not too far away from you guys. And yeah, I've been a senior leader for quite some time now, and I've worked in 5 different secondary schools. And I think the topic that you're debating is a fascinating one. I think there is a danger inherent in a conversation about how boys and how girls learn. And I know that you alluded to as much at the start of the conversation, but I think there are definitely some, stepping aside from that and, heavily filling in my disclaimer, I think there are certain approaches that I found interesting and a couple of kind of avenues that I have explored to some relative success. But I'll be the first to say that, I'm not here to wave a magic wand or to suggest that there's a sticking plaster that fixes all of this. It was interesting when the last chap sent the messages in, we're talking about primary school, because I think fundamentally for me, what it comes down to is a relational approach. And I think that where primary schools have success, in particular, is when young boys have that teacher that they have for that entire year, and they build a really strong relationship with that member of staff. And then when we send them to secondary school, we put them in a situation where they are, they might have 7, 8, 9 different teachers.
Yeah.
And I think when a relationship is built, it's something that my wife, who was a primary school teacher, she always talks about currency. She says the most successful people, particularly the teachers in secondary schools, are the PE teachers. Why is that? Is it because boys love sport? Actually, I think it's more to do with the fact that they build relationships outside of the classroom with young men.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, they often have currency. So they went on that football fixture, they went on that school trip together. And when you take children out and when you build those relationships, when you get them back into the classroom, you've got a little bit of currency to cash in with. When the behaviour's not quite right, you can say, come on, we've already developed that relationship. Remember when we did that? And I think that element, it's not necessarily a classroom-based strategy, but building the relationship. I think boys, in my experience, I think that has more of an effect when getting them on side, as we say.
Yeah.
And as somebody who spends a lot of my time walking around the corridors, having that relational approach, taking the time to get to know them a little bit. It's not necessarily saying let's teach about the subjects they want. Let's make it competitive, or let's talk about football. It doesn't have to be those things, but it's just.
Yeah.
I think boys tend to struggle with trust, and I think when they trust somebody, they'll probably give that little bit more of themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And that mirrors what I've experienced, because I am absolutely not a PE teacher, and never will be, but I have always been involved in various drama productions and evenings and events in the schools I've worked in, and knowing the students outside of the classroom in that specific and intense extracurricular way absolutely impacts how they engage with you, how you engage with them, your relationships in the classroom. It definitely carries over. So I can see, sorry, go on.
No, sorry. I think it's a starting point. It's I'm not advocating that we all have to go and make friends with the children in our classes, because the idea is that by building that relationship, it is a stepping stone to getting them to see the value in what you're trying to say to them. But being controversial, strip it right back. I think fundamentally the education system is set up more for girls to succeed than boys, if I'm completely honest.
Okay, how's that?
Well, I think if we talk about, again, being cautious of our stereotypes, I think we often, I'm an English teacher, so I know that when I'm talking about a text, I think the characteristics of my lesson, the lengthy discussions that we might have, the fact that sometimes, the structure will be flexible, will suit those that like to sit and like to think and like to reflect. I'm a father of 2 daughters. My daughters, from a very small age, would happily sit with a book. My nephew, not so much so. He was running around the house, climbing up and down the curtains. So I think when we have lessons where there's prolonged periods of concentration, when there's prolonged periods of focus, that doesn't necessarily play to the characteristics of somebody who is high energy, somebody who might struggle with failure, somebody who might not have developed resilience. You said yourself a little bit earlier, they might not quite have the maturity that a girl of the same age has. And again, I appreciate we're talking generally, but I think classroom situations where we can create those small, measurable opportunities to succeed are classrooms where boys tend to feel safer, classrooms where boys tend to be a little bit more successful. And I think, in my experience, I think, creating those opportunities for those short, sharp activities is fundamental to engaging. We have to build. You obviously have to build to a point where, you are writing for prolonged periods of time. But I think short, sharp is absolutely key to helping boys ultimately that are struggling in confidence and struggling with aspiration. They don't know what they want to do. They want to be footballers because they see footballers who are successful. They see footballers who've got it all quickly. I know I feel like I'm ranting on, but I feel very passionate about this topic.
It's a good thing.
And it's just I think it's creating a system where, not where we're all in competition with one another, but creating opportunities for boys to succeed. Because I think they feel the pinch of failure really, really sharply, because it's about saving face. It's about being, competing against their friends and things. And I think I know I've seen that, and where we get successes, it's when we manage to kind of harness that competitive spirit, but in an environment where everybody succeeds, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I feel like so many, like, it all just comes back to generalizations being a problem. But I feel like so many of the things you said about short, sharp tasks and building up to things, it's, that applies to everybody as well. Some girls may be more inclined to get to those longer tasks faster or earlier than the boys, or not. And some may prefer different ways of learning things, but it's nothing you've just suggested, nothing you've said would be harmful for any of the students in the room. So it is kind of, I suppose, trying to do what our jobs are always trying to do, which is cater for every single individual in that classroom, and do what's best for them, which is, hard, but that's what we do. So thank you, Steve. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Anything else you want to rant about?
No, I'm stepping off my soapbox, but I just, thank you so much for having me on tonight. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for calling in. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Dave, does any of that resonate with you and your experiences of the boys and how they respond to how you are trying to teach in the classroom, and maybe what approaches you take?
Yeah, absolutely. Like a lot of the points Steve made there were great. The first one, he says, like, building a relationship up outside the classroom, I think is absolutely key. I've been fortunate enough to go on. I've been abroad with I've been abroad twice with the schools I've worked at. One was a sporting event where, because I managed a rugby team, I was fortunate enough to be invited to go along to Italy for a week over Easter, and being like, lucky me, right? It was generally really good fun, but being able to spend time with students that I teach in the classroom for an hour, where I have to be behavior management on point, maybe sometimes, as Steve said, pulling in some of that credit that you've earned, but then working with them and playing rugby and football and coaching them through games and spending time with them outside of school. When we came back, by the time they got back into lessons, it was a case of, right, lads, I know what you're capable of, but now I want to see it in the classroom. And building up that positive relationship is an absolute winner. Especially when they see you as something else other than in a shirt and tie, shorts and a t-shirt in the middle of Italy. It's like, right, let's do this. Let's go play football and do what you enjoy talking about. Let's actually see what you're made of. And I
absolutely,
think that's an amazing way to build that relationship.
Absolutely, reminds me of the time I went on a school trip to Barcelona. Excuse me. Sorry, something in my throat. But we took a coach from London. So spend 24 hours on a coach full of children and 4 other adults, and none of you will ever be the same again. So it absolutely does make a huge, huge difference. It really does. And what about those classroom tips about the short, sharp tasks? Is that anything you've tried?
Yeah, again, a great point that was raised. I find that I struggle with extended writing. I always have done. I'm not much of obviously I learned what I needed to do to get the grades I did. But if you asked me to do the same thing again now, I would sit there and be that student who doesn't who knows what they're doing, but doesn't want to say they know what they're doing. They just find it too
Yeah.
difficult. And
Yeah.
I think approaching tasks in a way which right, guys, we're going to do this format question. Right, it's 2 points explained. Let's do one as a class. Let's go. And you can see them engaging in the fact because it's less writing to do a format question. But if you use modeling answers, building up the confidence, because let's not forget in geography, in most schools, it's not setted. It's based on
Yeah.
other subjects that they take and which option column they happen to be in. So the abilities of students that you're teaching can range from grade 9 all the way down to grade 4. Or I never want to give a target grade of a 3 or lower to a student. So
Yeah.
just feel like that aspirationally, that's not a particularly great place for anyone to be.
Mm-hmm.
So when you can see a grade 9 student sat at the back, boy or girl, cracking on with a question because they know exactly what they're doing, it's then great. But knowing that in potentially, let's go back to the statistics you found, a third of them are struggling with how to go about even just the opening sentence. It's then taking that time, right, rather than setting off, you've not done a 9 marker before, let's break this down, let's scaffold it, let's talk about the case study, let's do one as a class, or indeed, let's do it as a little group here so you guys can help each other out. And the attention span of boys and girls, to be fair, like rather than just doing a broad stroke and generalize, so we've been speaking.
Well, that's what we're doing all hour, yeah.
Yeah, breaking it down and finding ways to engage in those particular bits, I think is short, sharp, and obviously you have to do extended pieces when you need to. But if they're well practiced and feel confident enough to approach the shorter ones and eventually build that confidence up, so that when they have that 9 marker or we only go up to 9 in geography, so I don't know what you guys have to deal with. It's then a case of, right, you've got the confidence, let's build this up. And when they do well, even approach this, or have even the smallest go at it, it's like, right, that is amazing, let's build it up for next time. And I think when you build up that positive relationship and build up their confidence in that regard, behavior in the classroom then becomes easier to manage, and engagement in lessons becomes easier to manage because they're confident in your ability to get them through the tough bits.
Yeah, and that's so much of what I was finding in the research and the literature as well. So much of it comes down to confidence and this absolute terror that boys feel about being made to feel or look in front of their peers stupid, to look inept, to look less manly, to look bad, basically, in front of their peers. And so much of it comes down to one blog post I read summarized it by saying it was insecurity, apathy, and testosterone. And I'm not I'm not convinced about the apathy, because that to me that comes dangerously close to calling them lazy, and we know there's always something else at play going on. But the insecurity, so much of it is the insecurity, and I'm trying not to just blame parental or familial failures, or blame the culture we live in, or blame the social media, or just blame any of these monoliths, because they're not. But I really do think so much of it comes down to everything that boys, young men, grown men have been told that they have to be, and the terror that boys and young men must feel if they are even temporarily in a position where they feel that they can't fulfill those stereotypes of what an acceptable masculine man is meant to be. And if they're somehow emasculated or somehow made to look inferior or look bad in front of their peers, that must really genuinely feel like the end of the world for them. And I'm making a whole bunch of assumptions here, because I've never been a young man. I've never been a boy. But I can imagine that is quite a real fear that they have. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. Again, so a conversation that my wife and I have quite a lot of times is that there's a lack of positive role models in the world. Boys are told not to, well, you're not allowed to cry, you're not allowed to express your feelings. You have to just suck it up and off you go. Whereas actually what we need to do is be focusing on the fact that we need to get boys to engage with their feelings, express how they're actually feeling. And when we're able to do that on a wider and more regular basis, we'll probably find a way for boys to break through that barrier of bravado, that testosterone, as you just quoted there. And actually, it doesn't matter what your mates think. Right now, we're talking about you. And if they're more open to have that conversation, then the whole new world is open in terms of, right, we now know what's going on. We now can look at ways in which we can try and manage that behavior, or find ways in which to make you feel safer and more confident in school to start with, and then obviously breaking it down into particular classrooms, particular subjects. Obviously, working in a pastoral role myself, the most conversations we have around here is once we pastorally, I don't get to go outside my classroom very often, sometimes on some days, but when I do, it's a case of regularly speaking to the same students, and a lot of it is, I don't like this particular lesson. Well, what is it you don't like about it? And sometimes they say a particular teacher, which I don't agree with, and then we have that conversation again, like, right, that's not actually what you mean. What do you mean? It's I'm finding this particular bit difficult. Right. Thankfully, I know the answer to this particular question. I'll talk you through it, and we can go there, build up that confidence, and right, are you happy with how that works? Yeah, I feel better about that. Right, let's get you back in, and now you know how you're working, or now you know the answer to that particular question. It's a case of, right, we've broken down that barrier. Let's see what other subjects you're potentially struggling, and we can put an intervention in early doors, rather than sort of focusing it in a more generalized area. We can then have a look at ragging timetables, which subjects you're struggling more in. Right, let's have a conversation around that, and I feel like confidence and having more positive male role models is an absolute way forward, and more of them on social media rather than the quick fix, making lots of money, football YouTubers, streamers, and having more real world positive role models to look up to is an absolute way forward. As I said at the start of the podcast, we unfortunately, I think, have a lot of things that can be blamed on social media, both in and outside the classroom. And if we can tackle some of those things, obviously we're in a school, we have umpteen billion things to do as a teacher. I'm not looking to solve the issue of social media in an hour, but I think it's definitely something we can look into, and how we approach this in schools, so that we can show how men have grown up in a positive environment and have actually gone on to do something more than just what they generally see on, Snapchat or TikTok it is at the minute. So I absolutely agree with that point.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we've got some text that I will read in just a moment, with some primary insights as well.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
On the 24th to the 26th of January 2024, Bet UK is back, and even better for educators. New for 2024, Table Talks empowers educators to collaborate openly and connect deeply with like-minded individuals in the education space, as well as tech user labs, the brilliant new tutorials, and working groups at BET, where technology users will learn how to get more out of their institution's tech from the top education technology experts in the world. Whatever your goal, you'll find it at BET 2024. Educators go free. Get your tickets today at www.uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
So we've got some more comments from Paul about primary school. So he says one of the biggest barriers at a younger level is boys' inability sometimes to articulate how they're feeling, why they're angry or upset, which is still a problem in secondary, I can tell you right now. And I can imagine it's even more so when children are younger. He also says it can be really difficult for teachers to break down those tough exteriors which come from home, where they may need it to have a stronger side to survive a difficult home life, etc. And Paul works in quite a deprived area. I would say I do too, and both of the schools I've worked in since I trained in London have also been in very deprived areas. So I've seen that in action as well, and it can be really difficult because you come into this classroom and you just want to make connections with these kids, and you want to inspire them, and you want them to achieve, and you want them to fly away and have these wonderful lives. And we are constantly up against all these invisible things, that these daily battles they are fighting that we know very little or nothing about. And it can be so easy, and again, this is true of all students who are challenging at any particular time. It can be so easy to forget the person behind the behavior, or the student behind the so-called challenge. And I think everything we've said, you were saying, Dave, and about the pressures specifically put on boys, I think they feel that, and they feel that need to be tough and to keep those walls up. They feel that probably more than most of our female students do. So it is so hard what we're trying to do. But I like what Steve said about the relational approach and trying to build those relationships, which is exactly, what you were saying about kind of building them up and trying to build that resilience and building their confidence and building their social and emotional intelligence from the pastoral side, but also in the classroom. It's all these balls that we're trying to juggle. And I feel I've had a lot of conversations recently with people about, because there's so much on edgy Twitter that is just noise, but there's so much. Are you on it, Dave? Are you on Twitter? Okay, I don't mean Twitter, obviously. I mean X, because why would anyone call it Twitter now? I'm not old. There's so much on there that is also useful, and you get all sorts of interesting viewpoints. But there's a lot of conversations right now about how students should be sanctioned for various things, and to what extent we should be these bleeding heart teachers that just care about the child and are willing to let ourselves get walked over. All these really hyperbolic statements, and to me, it really comes down to the question of what should be versus what is. Like, what should be is that boys don't have to deal with any of this. Boys don't have to manage toxic masculinity. Boys don't have to put up with this. Boys don't have to worry about that stuff and have this chip on their shoulder all the time. That's what should be. What should be is that students can come to the class. Everyone respects every member of staff in the school. They respect each other. They want to learn. They have aspirations for themselves, and they just get on with learning. That's what should be. But that is very clearly not
an ideal world.
Yeah, and that's not what is. And we're not going into a fantasy land when we walk through our classroom doors. We're trying to, do the best with what we have, do the best that we can for these young people, and give them the best chance that they can possibly have. That's why we're here, and we have to work with what we've got in front of us. We have to meet them at their level. We have to meet them where they are. So I do think personally, I do think a relational approach is the way to go. Obviously, maybe not, Scotland level. Let's give bullies a hug and a candy cane, but I do think that is probably the way forward, because the nature of that approach requires you to consider the individual and build some sort of connection with that particular child, rather than treating them as a number or kicking them out if they can't get it together one time, or all of these things. So much of the noise on Twitter/X and so much of the arguments I have with various professional friends really, really comes down to that what should be versus what is issue. And I'm starting to feel like I'm back in some sort of first year of uni philosophy class, and it's a bit late for that. So do you have, yes, dangerous territory on a Monday night. So is there anything you want to add? Any final words of wisdom? Any final thoughts, Dave?
I think sort of like a lot of the things we discussed. I think it's important to say a lot of teachers are doing a lot of the stuff we speak about on a regular basis and engaging huge amounts of students in what we do. I think if you were looking at all the provisions we could provide, a lot of it comes down to, as one of the news bulletins mentioned, funding in schools needs to be looked at, and I think a lot of issues could be solved by funding in the right areas, and what we could do with that in terms of providing more emotional support, resilience, having school-trained counsellors in schools to break down some of these barriers. And I think, was it Paul, you mentioned in very deprived areas where these barriers have to be built up as a form of protection. I think if we could find ways and manage those properly, we'd probably find that engagement in classroom would then follow swiftly. But we do with what we can. And I think even if we get a majority of our students through the door with the grades they get to go on and do whatever they've particularly set their mind to, even at the last minute, then at least then we know that we've done our job as educators to get them the grades that they deserve on their CV, so that when they walk through a door, they aren't told to turn around, they're told to sit down and wait their turn for an interview. Yeah, that's so much of all I want. Trying to focus on the end goal and the positives. I think that's how most teachers have to get through the day, especially in December. It's very cold. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Dave, and Steve, if you're still listening, and Paul, if you're there. Thank you so much for your contributions, and hope you have a lovely remainder of your evening and a wonderful rest of the week.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.